Okay, let's set up some custom authentication. It's good that you learn how to do this. So we're going to go to our route/web file, and we're going to say, well, to begin, we need a link to register and sign in, right? So we might have /register, and then we'll also have one for /login. Now you have a couple choices here when it comes to the controller, as always. You could have a general auth controller that handles both. Something like this, auth controller at login and auth controller at register. And that would be fine, honestly. Now, another option is to split these up. Maybe for signing in, you could have something along the lines of a sessions controller. And if you do that, you can rewrite this to the traditional action name, like create. Display a form to create a new session. Next, the same thing here. This could be a registration controller, and then display a form to create a new user. I'm not going to tell you to do one or the other. It's up to you. In general, though, a piece of advice I would give you is if you feel a controller getting kind of bloated, where you start adding a lot of methods that aren't one of the 7 actions here, like create, show, store, delete, and update. If you start feeling that controller get kind of gross and bloated, at that point, yeah, you might want to consider extracting dedicated controllers that have more specific responsibilities. So with that in mind, maybe we can stick with this approach. All right, so PHP Artisan make a controller called Sessions Controller, and then another one for Registration Controller. Great. Let's switch over to these. Within HTTP controllers, Registration Controller, and we'll have our create method. From now on, I'm going to use a snippet here to speed things up. Okay, let's go to Sessions Controller and do the same thing. We don't have a user yet, so why don't we work on registration to begin with? This should load a view, and how about sessions.create? And I can build that view. Resources, views, sessions, create.blade.php. Now, if we switch over to our resources directory, into views, remember, we have a layout/master file that we can reference. So let's do that now. So again, I have a snippet for that. We'll use that from now on. And always, I'm going to paste in our main section, and we'll just have register. Okay, let's take a look. blog.dev/register. And there we go. We have our registration page. Okay, so now at this point, we're just going to build up our form. We, of course, need our CSRF field that we've discussed. Next, we're going to have a text input for the user's name. Next, I'm going to do another one for the email. And we can make that an input type of email. And again, we're just working off the fields in our database. So name, email, and password. One more, password. Now, we can also add a password confirmation field, but we'll hold off on that just so I can show you how to perform that piece of logic. So if we give this a refresh, we're just about done. Let's just add a submit button in the process. All right, a few snippets can really take us a long way for things like this. So we're all set. Now, where should this direct us? Well, if we go back, let's see. If we post to register, that can send us to a store method. All right, let's come back. We have a new method for store, and this is where we will attempt to create the new user in our system. So we can go back to our view, come up to the form, and say, the method is going to be post, and the action will be to /register. Okay, so the user fills this out. They're going to hit the store method, and now we're going to build up a new user. I will import it, and let's write this out. We want to validate the form. If everything goes according to plan, create and save the user. And then finally, redirect maybe to a special page, or for now, we're just going to redirect to the home page. However, one more thing. Once we create the user, we should probably sign them in, right? Okay, so we're all set. Let's validate the request using the given params. So I'm going to say you have to give us a name, and you have to give us an email, and that should be of an email type. So we'll add an additional validation layer there. And then you have to give us a password. And like I said, at the end of the video, I'm going to show you how to do password confirmation as well. So if everything goes according to plan, only then will we get to this next step where I can create the user. So we could, of course, say user create, or if you want to be a little more clear, you could always create a register method. For now, I'm just going to stick with create. And we'll say request, and the only fields I'm going to pass are name, email, and password. Next, we can log in the user by using what we would call an auth facade. And we haven't talked about facades too much just yet. But anyways, you could say auth login, and that's kind of a nice, expressive, testable way you could go. There's also a auth helper function, and you're going to find this in a lot of cases, such as for request. You could say request and then get the input, or you could say request and then get the input. And using the helper function is sometimes nice because you don't have to import the class at the top. For example, if I were to say request input, I would either have to do this or say use request at the top of the class. Whereas if I can just say call the request function, I don't have to import anything. Anyways, we could say auth login user, and let's just save the created user there. Validate the form, create the user, sign them in, and then redirect to the home page. Now I could say this, or I could also say redirect home. All right, let's give it a shot. Refresh, John Doe, john@example.com, and password. Now in this case, the password is clear. You know what? I'm not as against that as some people. I think we'd have less password reset requests if we just did it like that, because how often do you sign up with somebody looking over your shoulder? But nonetheless, let's just make it a bit more traditional. And actually, in this case, I just realized we put this in the sessions folder. That should, of course, be in the registration folder. So we'll move that over shortly. But until then, we're going to say input type of password, and that will turn this into stars. Okay, so we will hit register, and we get route home not defined. So here's the deal. Within your controller, when you say redirect home, you have to explicitly name the route that corresponds to home. So you can do it this way. This is our home route. So I could say name is home. Okay, let's come back and give it another shot. We register, we're signed in. Once again, we should probably display a little flash message to the user, but we'll do that later. But anyways, it does redirect us to the home page where we don't currently have any posts. So if I now say PHP Artisan Tinker at user all, there we go. Here's our new user. Now, at this point, we do have a signed-in user. Not much feedback, but we can, of course, add a username in the navigation bar. But before we do that, we do need to give users the ability to log out. You can make this a post request or a get request. Quote-unquote best practices would say that this should be a post request to prevent people from being able to link to this and automatically sign you out. I think in practice, it just doesn't matter that much. Nobody's going to do that to you. But if that's the case, then of course you can make this a post request. Otherwise, when we hit that, we're going to call a destroy method on sessions controller. Let's add a destroy method. And now, once again, I can just say auth log out. And then finally, redirect back to the home page. Okay, great. So now, if I call log out, it logs me out, redirects back to the home page, and I am not signed in. Now, if we go back to register, I would like to do one more thing. It's generally a good idea to ask the user to retype their password to make sure they entered it correctly. So let's go back to our create view, and then right here, I'm going to duplicate this, and then I will add another one for a password confirmation, like this, and then we're going to call this confirmation. It's important that we name it in this specific way. The name of the field _ confirmation, and this is due to validation concerns. So if I give it a refresh, there we go. But next, I want to make sure that the user types the correct thing in here. So let's do this. Right at the bottom, maybe another div form group, we're going to include layouts.errors, right? We created that earlier. Layouts.errors. We'll check to see if there were any validation errors and then display them here. And it looks like this already has a form group, so I can just do this. All right, let's give it a shot. Register, and there we go. But what if we type the password in wrong? Register. We get 2 errors, but nothing related to the fact that we typed the password wrong. So let's do this. We will go back to our registration controller, and then as part of my validation, I'm going to say the password is confirmed. So when we add this, we are instructing Laravel's validator to make sure that the request field for password also matches up with a request field for password _ confirmation. And that's specifically why we named it in this way. So for example, if we have a name and we want this to be confirmed for some reason, well, then you would also have an input called name _ confirmation. All right, so if we give that a refresh, type something in wrong, register, now you'll see that we get the password confirmation does not match. Okay, this is looking pretty good to me. So to finish up here, I'm going to say this input is required. We're going to add a little browser level validation. All right, so now we can't even submit the form without providing some details. Jane Doe, jane@example.com, password, register, and there we go. Jane is signed in, and we have her account. Now, let's provide a little feedback, maybe a welcome back Jane Doe or something like that. So I'm going to go and close all this out. We're going to go to that nav partial that we extracted, and this has all of these dummy links here. Maybe this will be, her name, Jane Doe. I'd like this to be pushed over to the right. I assume with Bootstrap, maybe you can create a new nav, but I also know I can just set the margin left to auto, and they have a class for that. So that should push it over, and it does. But there might be a more proper way to do it. Nonetheless, this looks good. But of course, if you're not signed in, you still see Jane Doe. We can fetch the authenticated user by saying auth, using the auth function, or again, the auth facade. Auth user name. Give me the authenticated user, which would be one of these instances here. Next, give me their name. All right, come back, refresh, but now this is going to fail because we don't have a signed-in user. But if we come back and give that one a refresh, we do. All right, so it sounds like we need to check to see if the user is signed in. If auth, check to see if we have a signed-in user, and only on that condition do we display this link. Refresh, we see Jane Doe, but if I switch to the other one, give that a refresh, we don't see anything, which is exactly what we want. And yeah, presumably that would be a link to their settings area. Now, next step, let's have Jane Doe create a post. So she goes to this form, but again, right now, anyone can visit that form. That doesn't make sense. I don't want any guests to visit this form. So I'm going to come back and we're going to go to our post controller. And at the very top, I'm going to say, set up a constructor function. And then we want middleware. So you must be signed in order to create a post. But any guest can view all posts. Any guest can show a single post. It's just create and store for the time being. Or we could say, all other routes are going to be locked down except index and show. Why don't we try that one? Okay, let's come back and give that a refresh, and you can't access it. Notice it links us to a login page that we haven't created. However, if we refresh with Jane Doe signed in, she can visit this. Easy, no problem there. So she'll provide a title and a body, but this is going to blow up, right? Yes. So once again, we're trying to create a post. We gave it a title, we gave it a body, but then we updated our migration to require a user. So of course, we didn't provide one, so it blows up. Okay, let's see what we're doing here. In the store method, we validate the request. So we call post create, but it looks like we also need to give it a user ID. So here's our choices. We could say the title will be request title. The body will be the request body. And then we could also say the user ID will just be the authenticated user's ID, or there's a helper function where you can say auth ID to get the exact same thing. And I believe that would work. So if we come back and refresh my first post, and then paste in some lorem text, publish, and there we go. We could even display that by coming back. That will be our posts/index view. Here we can see we filter through every post and display it. So let's find that partial. And here it is, the body, the date, and the H2. Maybe right here, we could say, give me the post and the user who created it. I want their name. So you'll remember we added that relationship in the previous episode, right? Post, give me the user who owns it, and then I want to grab their name. So we could say maybe post on, refresh, yeah, Jane Doe on January 27th. So that's great. But now, if we come back, and honestly, I think this is 100% fine and clean and simple. No issues there whatsoever. But just to show you that the fun part about coding is you get to be the creator. You get to hold the paintbrush. So you could also call a method on your authenticated user object. And you could say user publish a new post. And here you would say request title and body. And we can even put this on its own line. So now, yeah, maybe this reflects how, once again, the client or you would speak about this. If you want to give the user an option to publish a new post, user, publish, post. All of those keywords are there. All right, so let's see what that would look like. I'm going to cut this out, and it looks like on our user class now, again, that's in the app directory, we'll scroll down, And we're going to have a new method here called publish. And now I'll paste in what we had before. But notice that we already have a relationship between a user and their posts. So like we learned a couple episodes ago, another option is to simply say this posts save the given post. Let's try it out. Save it, come back. We're going to create a new one, my second post. And again, we will add some lorem text. But whoops, we get an error. So let's debug this together. On post controller line 39. All right, post controller line 39. What's the issue? It must be of type array, but a string was given. Request, yep, we forgot to make that an array. Okay, run it again, and there we go. We have our second post. But now, yeah, this is very clean. Now, you might be wondering why we said save instead of create. These are two different ways to do it. So if I were to say create, I can give it an array of params. However, if I have an existing instance of the relation, and in this case I do, because I newed up a post, in that case, I can just say, save the existing model that you have. And once again, in the process, because we referenced this relationship, it will automatically set the user ID for us. So take a look. App post, give me all of them. And there we go. Second post has the user ID automatically applied. Okay, so let's just do the final things and we'll finish up for this episode since it's running a bit long. The first step is I accidentally put our registration view within our sessions view. Let's move it. Resources, views, registration, create. And I'll save that. Next, within registration controller, I will update this. Sorry about that, brain freeze. Next, we validate, we create the user, we sign them in, and we redirect home. Nice and simple. Next, we need our sessions. So if we go back to our sessions create form, we're going to extend our layout, and then we'll have our div call md8. All right, sign in. Let's take a look at that. blog.dev.login or /login, but we don't see anything. Let's see if we set up the routes right. So when you visit /login, we're going to load a sessions controller. We probably forgot to populate that. Yep, we did. Return view sessions.create. Return this view. And there we go. All right, so now at this point, as always, we just populate our form. We need our CSRF field. The form will post to sessions. And then finally, what do we need here? We need an email field. And let's update that input. And then we also need a password field. And we'll make that an input of type password. Finally, we need a button field. All right, refresh, and that looks good. So now we filled this out. It submits a post request to /sessions. We don't have that yet. Actually, you know what? Why don't we just say route post to /login? And that will be sessions controller at store. Create or prepare a new session. So we'll update this. All right, so we go to sessions controller now. Notice how doing Command P is much faster. In general, actually, in real life, I keep the sidebar closed almost exclusively, but I do try to keep it open for these tutorials. Anyways, we're going to have a store method, and this is where we attempt to authenticate the user. So we're going to take what they gave us here, and we're going to check to see, well, do we have a user that matches this? And if so, sign them in, and then redirect to the home page again. But if not, redirect back. Okay, so once again, we can use the auth facade or the auth helper function to say, attempt to sign in this user or authenticate this user. So let's provide the request. We're going to give it the email as well as the password. That's what Laravel will want. Now, the attempt method is especially nice. It takes care of all the logic related to comparing these credentials against what you have stored in the database. And if they match, it will also automatically sign the user in. So what we could do is say, if not, so if we were not able to sign the user in, then we could redirect back. Otherwise, if we get past this point, we do have valid credentials. So they're already signed in, so that's done, in which case we can redirect them to the home page. Okay, but one more thing. Let's give it a refresh. We're trying to sign in, but Jane Doe is already signed in. So this is a good example of using the guest middleware. If you're signed in, why are you looking at a sign-in page? It makes no sense. You already are. So we're going to come back and say, for the sessions controller, set up a constructor here, where specifically I'm going to call the guest middleware. I sort of think of these as like filters. This is adding a guest filter so that only guests are allowed to make it through that filter. And if you are instead an authenticated user, you don't get to access any of these. So now if I give it a refresh, it redirects us. And in this case, it's trying to take you to your dashboard. Of course, we can create that route or configure it, but this is right. So if we have a incognito mode, you'll see that we can access this. Okay, great. So let's sign in Jane. And there we go. She signed in, and we can see that right here. But if we log her out, oh, whoops, yeah, we made a mistake. On our sessions controller, we said every route is bound to the guest filter, but actually that's not true. The destroy method, that should not. So let's say middleware, except destroy. If you are signed in, then you can totally access that action. I sounded like a Valley Girl there. You can totally do that. So let's do it again, and now we're signed out. Okay, so let's go back to login, but this time I'm going to do a password that doesn't match. All right, sign in. It does redirect back, but we don't have any feedback here. Let's do this. If we could not sign you in, I'm going to redirect back, but I'm also going to include some errors. And we'll say here, message will be, maybe please check your credentials and try again. Now you can see that in this particular case, I'm being explicit about the errors I pass. But also, when there are validation errors, you can manually redirect back, and those will be populated. Okay, so let's go back to our create view, and we need to add our errors. We're starting to see how convenient it was to extract that. Okay, one more time. Anything here, sign in, and there we go. Please check your credentials and try again. So she checks them, signs in, and we're all set. So let's go through the entire process one more time. We're going to register this time myself, and register. Okay, I'm signed in. Of course, I clicked some nice button to create a post. Jeffrey's thoughts. Paste some lorem text, publish it, and now we have one blog post by me and another blog post by Jane. Excellent job.